Well, good morning. Glad you could join us this morning. We want to welcome you to Sunday school here at Macedonia Baptist Church as we are continuing our study through Esther. We're in Esther chapter 8. And where we are is we are in the middle of this tangled web of Esther chapter 8. Remember, even though Haman has died, you still got this decree of death hanging over the Jews. You've still got this decree of destruction for the Jews still out there. That has not changed. So what you have here is you've got this just tangled web that Haman has come up with that he signed with the king's signature. I will tell you this. Most people say that Esther's greatest chapter is chapter 4 when she comes and says, "And so I will go to the king, which is against the law." Remember that, by the way. "And if I perish, I perish." A lot of people will tell you that is Esther's greatest verse. That is Esther's greatest moment in this story. But I'm going to tell you, I believe it's here in chapter 8. Because right here in chapter 8, you're going to see the heart of this woman. You're going to see the heart of this queen. You're going to see the compassion that she has for other people. In President Ronald Reagan's inaugural address in 1981, he says this, "We shall reflect the compassion that is so much part of your makeup. How can we love our country and not love our countrymen?" That's what you're going to see in Esther chapter 8. Because the first thing you're going to see is Esther's bravery. Now between chapter 8 verse 2 and verse 3, there is going to be a time lapse there. Whether some say later on that day, some say later that night, others will tell you that it's a week, others will tell you the next day. But anyway, there is some sort of time lapse that is taking place between verse 2 and verse 3. And I'll show you why in a second, why they say that. This does not take place at the banquet. The banquet is done in verse 3. The banquet is over. The king is back in the courtroom there, in his hall of the courtyard, and you have just this different time. And the reason why they say that is verse 4, because you see the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. In the banquet, you saw none of that. So that's the reason why that I believe that you've got this time between these two things. Now, what you're going to see in verse 3 is this. "Now Esther spoke again to the king, fell down at his feet, and implored him with tears to counteract the evil of Haman the Agagite and the scheme which he had devised against the Jews." Esther is once again going to break the law. She is once again going to come to the king uncalled for, unsummoned. Once again, you go back to verse 4, when Mordecai is trying to talk her into coming before the king, she says this, "All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court to the king, who has not been called, he has but one law, put all to death." And then, of course, you come down to Esther's, what a lot of people say is Esther's finest moment in verse 16. She says, "And so I will go to the king, which is against the law." So not only did Esther break the law in chapter 4, she's coming back and she is breaking the law again in chapter 8. She is coming again and breaking the law here in chapter 8. She goes into the king without being summoned. She goes into the king without being called for. In fact, not only is she breaking the law about not being summoned, she's also breaking the law about how she goes in. Do you remember the first time Esther goes to see the king? She dresses in her royal robes and she's in that royal courtyard and she makes sure that he could see her. Look at the difference this second time. She spoke again to the king. She falls down at his feet and implored him with tears and begs him, counteracts with the king. Now, you don't do that. You do not do that to the king in the ancient world. You never could go before the king angry, upset, sad, distressed. You could not go before the king that way in the ancient world. In fact, if you just take a couple of pages back in your Bible to Nehemiah, and Nehemiah, what you have is Artaxerxes is the king. Xerxes is dead. Artaxerxes is the king in Nehemiah. And there's Nehemiah is Artaxerxes' cupbearer. Now a cupbearer made sure the king's cup stayed full of wine. Why? Because you always wanted the king in a good mood. So your job was to keep the cup of the king full, but not only that, your job was also, you had to taste it to make sure there wasn't poison in it. So you would taste the wine first before you would give it to the king to make sure that there was no poison in it. So Nehemiah is Artaxerxes' cupbearer here in Nehemiah. And in Nehemiah chapter 2, we find that Nehemiah has learned that the walls of Jerusalem have been burned down. They've been broken down. They've been torn down. And Nehemiah is sad. He's upset. He's depressed. And in chapter 2 it says this, "And it came to pass in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was before him, that I took the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had never been sad in his presence before. Therefore the king said to me, Why is your face sad, since you are not sick? This is nothing but sorrow of the heart. So I became dreadfully afraid." Why was Nehemiah afraid? Because you can't come before the king sad. You cannot come before the king upset. You cannot come before the king angry. Why? You keep the king in a good mood. You give him no reason to be in a bad mood. And what you have here is Esther coming in uncalled for, breaking the law uncalled for, then crying, upset, falling at his feet, begging him to do something about Haman's edict that he had put out. Now, one thing I just want to remind you about this second time. Do you remember the first time that Esther made the plea to the king? Why did she do it? Well, she did it because she did it because Mordecai told her to. In fact, Mordecai he basically coerces her into doing it. Look back in chapter 4. In chapter 4, what does Mordecai tell her when he's trying to get her to talk to the king? "Do not think in your heart that you will escape the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. Esther, just because you're queen, just because you are in the castle, Esther, that don't mean that you're going to escape this edict. Esther, that means you're not going to be safe here." In fact, he goes on and says, "For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish." Mordecai's coming and he is basically saying, you're going to die. If you do not do something, you're going to die. This does not exclude you just because you're the king, you're the queen. Now look, chapter 8, there's no coercion. Chapter 8, this time, listen, this time Esther is already safe. In fact, her and Mordecai are already safe. Why? Because the king has found out about this, and if you think the king is going to let some yahoo come in there and kill his queen and kill his new number 2, you got another thing coming. So in chapter 8, the king and the king has already pretty much protected Esther and Mordecai. They are safe. They do not have to worry about this edict. This time, Esther is risking her life. She is coming before the king unsummoned, uncalled for, risking her life. She's coming before the king, crying, begging, risking her life for people she's never met, never seen, never talked to. She is risking all this because of her compassion and love for other people. People that she's never met. People that she's never even talked to. She is risking her life for the life of these Jews. She is concerned for her people. She has concern for other people. You see the heart of this woman. Look in verse 4. And the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king. So here it is now. Let me tell you something. I've told you this over and over and over again. The king really loves this woman. He never tells this woman no. He really loves her. He holds out the golden scepter to her, which once again, that's why a lot of people say this is a different time. This is not at the banquet. This is a different time. He holds out the golden scepter to her again, which basically is saying, okay, I won't kill you. And he never tells her no. She has broken the law twice by coming in uncalled for, and now she's coming in a bad mood. Think about something for a second. Now, if you study ancient kings, a lot of times they're not very patient men. They're not very patient men at all. Think about something. 2 times Esther shows up without being called for. 2 times she breaks the law. 2 times the law says she be put to death. 3 times the king asks her, what does she need? What does she want? I'll give you anything you want. 3 times he asks her that. 2 times he goes in and doesn't even get an answer. Now guys, how would you like if you ask your wife 3 times, what's wrong, what's wrong, what's wrong, and you never get an answer? Eventually you get agitated. The king has to go to her banquet 2 times. And then she has to tell him, hey, your best friend, your best buddy, your most trusted advisor, the guy you hang out with the most, Haman, he has manipulated you. He has tricked you. Your best friend has manipulated. She has told him he loves this woman. Anyway, the king now comes and he extends the golden scepter. And look in verse 4, it says, that Esther arose and stood before the king. Now when we get to verse 5, Esther is going to say 4 things. Esther is going to say 4 things before she even gets to what she wants. Look at what she says in verse 5. Esther said, if it pleases the king, honey, if this thing pleases you, darling, if this pleases you, and if I have found favor in his sight, honey, if I have found favor in your sight, if I have done anything that pleases you, honey, if I've done anything that pleases you, if I have found favor in your sight, and the thing seems right to the king, honey, if this thing seems right for you to do, if you think this is the right thing to do, honey, and I'm pleasing to thy eyes, honey, do I look good to you? So she comes and she asks these 4 things. She comes and she says, if it pleases the king, honey, if this thing pleases you, and if I have found favor in his sight, honey, if I have done anything that pleases you, and the thing seems right to the... Honey, if this thing seems right to you, if this thing seems like it's the right thing to do, and I'm pleased... Honey, if I look good to you. Well, she had him at this point. She is putty in her hands because this is the most beautiful woman in all the kingdom. She has asked him, is there any way... Look what she says. Let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to annihilate the Jews who are in all the king's provinces. She comes and she says, is there any way, sweetheart? Is there any way, baby doll? Is there any way, if this seems right to you, honey? Is there any way, if you think that this is the right thing to do, honey? Is there any way, if I have found favor in your sight, if I've done anything that pleases you, hear me. Is there anything that we can do to stop this? Take this thing back. Undo this. She is pleading with the king to stop this edict. Now, once again, she is pleading the king. She is risking her life, which he's already extended the golden scepter, but she is pleading with the king for people she's never met, for people she's never seen, for people that she don't know. She is pleading for a whole race of people in the Persian Empire, these Jews. In fact, look in verse 6 and you see her heart. You see the heart of this queen. She said, she comes and she says, not only if it pleases the king and have found favor in his sight and a thing in his eyes, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to annihilate the Jews who are in all the king's provinces. Verse 6, for how can I endure to see the evil that will come to my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my countrymen? Esther comes and she's begging for the lives of these Jews. Esther has come begging for the lives of people she has never seen before, talked to, met. She is begging for the lives of people that she's never had any interaction with. You see the heart of this woman. Just think about this for a second. Here is Esther. She shows up uncalled for. Number one, she breaks the law. You know what she's saying? It don't matter what happens to me. It don't matter. It don't matter what happens to me. I love and I care for my people. I don't want them killed. I don't want them hurt in any kind of way. Is there anything we can do here, honey? Your Highness, is there any way that we can change this? Is there any way you can undo this? Esther comes and speaks to her husband with compassion, concern, and love for her people. You see the heart of Queen Esther. Now here's my question to you. Do you have compassion? Do you have concern? Do you have love for other people? Not people that you know, not your best friend. How about people that you've never seen before, that you've never met, that you've never interacted with? How about somebody that you may never see? Do you have love and compassion and concern for them people like Esther? How about people that don't believe the same way you do? Do you show love and compassion to them? What about people that are on the opposite political party that you are? Do you show love and compassion to them? Are you concerned for them? What about the person that cuts you off going down APD 40? Do you show love and compassion for them? What about your poor old waitress that just messes your order up or it takes too long? Do you show love and compassion towards her? How's your heart? Do you show love, compassion, and concern for other people, even people you don't know? Because that's what Esther does in chapter 8. Well, thank you for joining us. I'm so glad that you was able to be here this morning. We want to invite you to come back next Sunday. Thank you. Have a good week. God bless.